Last week and this, we have spent our time in our Wonderful Day in the Lord broadcast looking at the temptations of Jesus, especially in light of what Hebrews tells us about why Jesus was tempted and how he can help us as our great high priest partly because of the temptations he has experienced. And so we've been going through the Gospels and seeing ways that Jesus faced temptations. We're going to finish up this week with today and tomorrow, looking at perhaps the greatest temptations Jesus ever faced. We've seen his temptations in the wilderness at the beginning of his ministry, his public ministry, and how Satan was so powerful in trying to derail him. We've seen temptations related to his home. We've seen temptations related to life in general, and of course the great temptations of the cross. But perhaps the greatest temptations that our Savior ever faced was in the Garden of Gethsemane, the night that he was betrayed and arrested, taken to trial, and led eventually to the cross. By the time he got to the cross, I think things had settled down and he accepted what was going to happen. That does not mean it was easy, but that meant that he had accepted that. But here in the Garden of Gethsemane, there's a great battle going on, a battle we would not have expected, a battle that shows us the very epitome, the very height of temptations. Jesus himself wanted to avoid the cross. And so we look at chapter 26 of the book of Matthew, and we start with verse 36. And it says, "And Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane." Now he's with his disciples. "And he said to his disciples, 'Sit here a while, and I'll go over there and pray.'" Notice as Jesus prepares for this great temptation, that the first thing he does is pray. So you and I, as we go into a situation in which we know temptation will be strong, let us follow this example. Let us bathe that circumstance in prayer. And so Jesus is headed to the garden, and he's going to be praying as he does so. So he's going to go over and pray. Verse 37, "And he took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, and began to be grieved and distressed." Lest we wonder if this was difficult for Jesus, we find that he is grieved and distressed. These are strong words. This is not describing a weak Christian or someone who really doesn't have a handle on anxiety or grieving. This describes Jesus Christ. He grieved. He was distressed. You and I at times grieve, where at times we are distressed. At such times, temptation can have the upper hand very easily. It's very easy when we're at this weak moment of life to give in to something. And especially if you have a sin that you have turned to throughout your life and you find yourself at a very low point, it's easy for you to just slip right on over and begin doing that same kind of sin. And so we need to be aware that those things are possible. And so Jesus is actually grieving. He's in despair in a sense as he goes to the garden. He's in distress. In verse 38, it says, "And he said to them, 'My soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. Remain here and keep watch with me.'" We find, once again, he mentions that he's grieving. He's struggling deeply here. And yet he calls for help. Here again, Jesus, the Son of God, the perfect, impeccable, complete, self-sufficient one, is asking for help. He calls to his disciples and he asks them to remain and watch with him during his time. He needed the support of those who loved him and those who cared for him. Again, what an example for us. In our deepest hours, don't try to do it alone. Don't stub up and say, I'm self-sufficient. I need nothing and no one. Follow the example of Jesus. Allow others who love you. Reach out to them. Allow them to love you and to pray for you and to watch for you during this difficult time. And then he goes on in verse 39, "And he went a little beyond them and fell on his face, and he prayed, saying, 'My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me.'" So Jesus goes to the Father and pours out his will. He pours out his desire. Here's what he wants. If there's any way possible for me to avoid the cross, Father, make it happen. But there wasn't. There wasn't any way. But Jesus gives it to him, to the Father. And you and I think, can pray in similar ways. Father, here comes a difficult thing into my life. Maybe it's already here. Lord, I want to avoid that, if at all possible. I'm going to give you my heart's desire. spare me this thing. But then we have one final thing that we see in this verse 39. He says, yet not as I will, but as you will. Jesus gave submitted to the will of the Father. He poured out his desire. He was grieved to the point of death. And yet he says to the Father, I submit to your will. I'll do that which you want me to do because it's the right thing to do and it brings you honor and glory. That should be the paradigm, the pattern of our prayers and our temptations. Just as Jesus was tempted, these are the steps, these are the patterns we should follow. I would encourage you to go back through and look at these steps, this pattern that Jesus lays for us. And the next time you're facing strong temptation, follow these steps. You will have a wonderful day in the Lord if you do. We're going to look at the rest of this particular temptation when we come back together tomorrow. I hope you can join us.